The garden was always immaculate. Our neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, took great pride in her flowers and vegetables. She would often invite us over for fresh produce or baked goods, but I never really got to know her beyond the occasional visit. As a child, I found myself drawn to the garden more than anything else about our house. The vibrant colors of the flowers seemed almost otherworldly, like they were trying to communicate some hidden message. My siblings and I would spend hours exploring every nook and cranny, searching for something we couldn't quite put our finger on. One day, while wandering through the garden, I stumbled upon a small door hidden behind a bush. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. The air around it seemed to vibrate with an eerie energy, like someone had whispered my name just before I turned the handle and pushed it open. Inside, I found myself surrounded by rows of identical flowers, each one perfectly aligned and eerily uniform. As I explored further, I began to notice that Mrs. Jenkins was no longer alone in her garden. The flowers seemed to be watching me, their petals twitching with an unnatural life. And then, I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of my vision, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. It wasn't until later, when I heard the sound of Mrs. Jenkins' laughter echoing from inside her house, that I realized I had been in there for hours, and she was still waiting for me to return with some fresh vegetables. The flowers seemed to be smiling at me now, their petals curled into a sinister grin as they whispered my name once more. The garden was always immaculate. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, took great pride in her flowers and vegetables. She would often invite me over for fresh produce or to admire the beauty of her garden. I never thought much of it until one day when I noticed something peculiar. At first, it seemed like a harmless hobby. But as time passed, I began to notice that Mrs. Jenkins spent an inordinate amount of time tending to her plants. She would be out there for hours on end, pruning and watering with the same zeal she showed towards me at dinner parties. It was almost obsessive. One evening, while walking home from school, I caught a glimpse of something peculiar through my window. Mrs. Jenkins was standing in front of one of her flower beds, staring intently at a single bloom. Her eyes seemed to be fixed on it with an unnerving intensity, and for a moment, she didn't notice me watching. It sent shivers down my spine. As the days went by, I started to feel like I was being pulled into Mrs. Jenkins' world of gardening. She would invite me over more frequently, always bringing some new creation from her garden, a perfectly arranged bouquet or an intricately carved wooden planter. But with each visit, I felt myself becoming increasingly entangled in the web she had spun around us both. And then one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, the soft whisper of leaves rustling against my window pane, and Mrs. Jenkins' voice, calling out to me from beyond the garden's borders, "Come and see." The garden was always immaculate. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, took great pride in her flower beds and vegetable patches. I would often see her out there early in the morning, tending to her plants with a gentle touch. But as time went on, I began to notice that she spent an awful lot of time in her garden. At first, it was just for a few minutes each day, but soon she'd be out there for hours, sometimes even all night long. Her house would go dark while she worked, and the only sound you could hear is the soft hum of machinery or the rustling of leaves. I started to feel uneasy whenever I saw her in her garden, as if something was off about it. One evening, I decided to take a closer look at Mrs. Jenkins' garden. I crept up to the fence that separated our yards and peered over into her flower beds. What I saw made my blood run cold. The plants were all twisted and gnarled, their leaves like grasping fingers reaching out towards me. In the center of it all was a massive tree with branches that seemed to stretch on forever. As I watched in horror, Mrs. Jenkins emerged from her house, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She began to tend to her garden once more, but this time she wasn't alone. A figure, twisted and distorted like the plants themselves, was standing beside her, its presence seeming to draw life out of the very air itself. I knew then that Mrs. Jenkins' garden had become a living thing, something malevolent that would consume us all if we didn't stay away. And as I turned to run back into my own yard, I heard Mrs. Jenkins whispering in her voice, "You should have stayed out of my garden."